In the frozen underworld of New York City, silence is not peace, it is a weapon. Roman Ashford, the infamous Deaf Dawn, ruled an empire of blood without ever hearing a single scream. His world was absolute control, absolute isolation, and absolute silence. A jagged scar ran from his temple down to his collarbone, a permanent reminder of the car bomb that stole his hearing and his parents 12 years ago. No one dined with him, no one touched him. To break his rules was to invite death. But on one stormy night, those rules were not just broken. They were shattered by the only creature on Earth brave enough to ignore his deadly reputation. This is the harrowing yet true-to-life story of a ruthless killer who had not felt human warmth in over a decade. A desperate mother fleeing 10 years of hell with scars both visible and invisible, and an 11-month-old baby girl with a failing heart who did not know she was crawling into the lap of a monster. Watch until the very end, because the betrayal revealed in the final act will leave you absolutely speechless. If this story moves you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another tale of darkness and redemption. Because sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room is the only one who can save you. The dining room of the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was not a place meant for dinner. It was a cathedral of ice. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass opened onto a sweeping view of Manhattan, a glittering web of electric light that Roman Ashford could see but never hear. He liked it that way. The penthouse sat on the 92nd floor, high enough to be severed from the world below, cold enough that no one dared enter without permission. Roman sat at the head of a mahogany table long enough to seat 20 people. Yet only a single place setting had been laid out. One white porcelain plate, one silver spoon, one crystal glass holding red wine. For 12 years, no second person had ever taken a seat at this table. That was the rule. That was the law. That was how Roman Ashford existed. He was 36 years old, but the jagged scar running from his left temple down to his collarbone made him look older and far more frightening than his age. A charcoal three-piece suit, tailored in London, wrapped around his broad shoulders like armor, concealing the beretta that always rested in its holster beneath his arm. Roman didn't eat right away. He placed his right hand flat on the tabletop, long scarred fingers spread as if poised over piano keys. He was listening, not with his ears, because his hearing had died 12 years ago in the car bomb that stole both his parents' lives. Roman listened with his skin, with his bones, with nerve endings trained over more than a decade to perceive the world in a way no one else could understand. To Roman, the world was a symphony of vibrations. He felt the steady pulse of the ventilation system inside the walls, a low hum traveling through plaster. He felt the heavy, hurried footsteps of Luca, his loyal right hand, pacing the hallway 3 rooms away, likely waiting on a report about tonight's shipment. He even felt the subway trains running deep beneath the city's bedrock, a distant, rhythmic tremor like the heartbeat of Manhattan. These vibrations were familiar. They were the background music of his life. They posed no threat. They never changed. But tonight, something was different. Roman tilted his head slightly, storm gray, eyes narrowing. There was a new vibration. It came from the kitchen, traveling through the granite floor, seeping into the palm of his hand pressed against the table. This vibration wasn't steady like machinery. It trembled, panicked, as if someone were trying and failing to suppress fear. Roman lifted the silver spoon, metal flashing beneath the dim chandelier. He didn't turn around. He didn't look back. He waited. In Roman's world, patience was the deadliest weapon of all. Whoever lost their composure first would die first. And Roman Ashford had never lost his composure. He had killed his first man at 29, only 5 years after the bombing. He had built this empire from the ashes of his family, with blood, with bone, with an absolute silence no one could penetrate. He had learned to read lips, read body language, read vibrations most people never noticed. He knew when someone was lying simply by watching the way they swallowed. He knew when someone was about to betray him by feeling their heart rate spike through a handshake. And right now, he knew something was wrong in the kitchen. The trembling vibration grew stronger, closer. The double doors leading into the dining room were about to open. The heavy double doors of oak wood slowly opened, and Camille Reyes stepped into the dining room. She was 27 years old, yet she looked as though she had lived through an entire lifetime. Her face was gaunt, high cheekbones jutting beneath skin drained pale by anemia. Her deep brown eyes were like 2 bottomless wells, holding obsessions no one wished to stare into for too long. Her black hair was hastily twisted into a high bun, exposing the nape of her neck where an old burn scar hid beneath stray wisps of hair, the remnant of the time Derek had pressed a scorching iron against her skin for burning dinner. She wore a black maid's uniform, a pristine white apron pressed smooth, her thin hands lifting a silver tray bearing a steaming bowl of lobster soup. And those hands were shaking so badly that the silver spoon struck the rim of the bowl again and again, releasing a soft, relentless clinking. Clink, clink, clink. Camille knew her employer couldn't hear it. The whole world knew Roman Ashford was profoundly deaf, but she also knew he could see the spoon trembling, see the surface of the soup rippling, see the fear seeping from every pore of her body. She lowered her head, taking small, careful steps across the marble floor, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Her lips moved soundlessly, a desperate prayer she had repeated all day long. Please don't wake up. Please, please don't wake up. Rosie, her daughter, 11 months old, lying inside an old portable crib Camille had hidden in the storage room behind the kitchen. It was the most insane thing she had ever done, bringing her child into the lair of one of the most dangerous criminals in New York. But she had no choice. Grace Chen, the housekeeper, had promised to look the other way as long as Camille kept the baby quiet, and Camille needed this job. She needed it the way she needed air to breathe. Because Rosie was slowly dying. Her tiny heart had a congenital hole, and without surgery within the next 3 months, Rosie would never see her first birthday. The operation required $200,000. Camille had exactly $347 in her account. She had fled from Derek 12 months earlier, running with empty hands and an 8-month pregnant belly. She had given birth to Rosie alone in an abandoned warehouse in Queens, biting into her own arm to keep from screaming through labor pains, terrified that any sound would give her away and lead someone to inform Derek. 10 years. 10 years she had lived in the hell Derek created. He had found her when she was 17, 2 years after her parents died in a house fire, 2 years after her own aunt sold her to a trafficking ring to pay off gambling debts. Derek had bought her from them for $5,000. He said it was love. He said it was salvation. He said she should be grateful to belong to him. Then he began beating her on their wedding night, the first time she became pregnant. He kicked her stomach until blood ran down her legs, and the 7-month-old child inside her never had a chance to cry for the first time. Camille swallowed her tears, forcing herself back into the present. She had reached the table. Roman Ashford sat there, motionless like a sculpture carved from stone and shadow. She didn't dare look directly at his face. She focused on the white porcelain bowl, beginning to ladle soup with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She felt his gaze burning into her skin. She knew he was reading her, reading every movement, every breath, every bead of sweat sliding down her temple. Soup dripped onto the immaculate white tablecloth, a red-orange streak of lobster broth spreading like blood. Camille wanted to cry, but she couldn't. She had to be strong. For Rosie, she just had to get through this dinner. Just keep Rosie asleep a few more minutes. Just don't let him discover her secret. Her lips kept moving. Please don't wake up. Please, please don't wake up. Then it happened. A sound. Not the spoon striking the bowl. Not the soup dripping. This was something else. Heavier. Softer. Like something falling onto the Persian rug behind Camille. Roman stopped breathing. His hand moved in a flash toward the Beretta hidden beneath his suit jacket, fingers closing around the cold grip. His storm-gray eyes locked onto the empty space behind the maid. Camille froze. The spoon hovered in midair, soup dripping onto the tablecloth like drops of blood counting down time. She knew. She knew without turning around. Her prayer hadn't been answered. Her heart skipped a beat, then raced as if it wanted to shatter her ribs. She slowly turned, and her world collapsed. Rosie was sitting there, in the middle of the $50,000 Persian rug, chubby legs folded beneath her, reddish-brown curls wild like a small cloud. She wore a faded pink onesie, frayed at the collar and cuffs, the only outfit Camille could afford from a thrift store. Rosie's skin was unnaturally pale, especially around her lips and fingertips. Signs of a tiny heart working too hard to push blood through the hole fate had carved into her chest at birth. Somehow, she had escaped the travel crib in the storage room. Somehow, she had crawled through the kitchen, through the double doors Camille hadn't fully closed, straight into the dining room of the most dangerous man in New York. Camille wanted to scream, to rush forward, scoop her daughter up, and run. Run far away. Run to somewhere without Derek, without Roman Ashford, without the ghosts of the past clinging to her heels. But her legs wouldn't move. She was nailed in place by pure terror. Then Rosie did something no one in the penthouse could have anticipated. She lifted her face, wide brown eyes just like her mother's, meeting the gaze of Roman Ashford, and she didn't cry. She didn't shrink back. She didn't show fear for even a second. In Roman's world, people looked at him in two ways, either with aggression and defiance, the eyes of those who wanted his throne, and were willing to die trying, or with trembling submission. The eyes of those who knew that if he so much as nodded, their lives would end within seconds. Rosie looked at him in neither way. She looked at him with pure curiosity, eyes round and unburdened by judgment, untainted by fear, untouched by any knowledge of how many people the man before her had killed, how many families he had destroyed, how many enemies he had sent into the icy depths of the Hudson River. To Rosie, Roman Ashford wasn't the deaf Dawn. He wasn't the butcher of Brooklyn. He wasn't the devil whispered about in the underworld. To Rosie, he was simply something new, a strange face, someone to explore. She tilted her head to one side, as if thinking, weighing, deciding whether this grown man was interesting. Then she smiled, a toothless smile with 2 new lower front teeth just breaking through, plump cheeks lifting, eyes crinkling into soft crescents, the most innocent smile Roman Ashford had seen in 12 years of living in darkness. Roman still hadn't released the gun, but his fingers were no longer clenched around the grip. Camille no longer had control over her body. A mother's instinct was stronger than any fear. She lunged forward, the silver tray crashing to the floor with a piercing clang, lobster soup splattering across the priceless Persian rug. She threw herself between Roman and Rosie, arms spread wide like the fragile wings of a bird shielding its nest from a hawk's talons. Then she collapsed to her knees. Her knees struck the icy marble floor, but she felt no pain. Her forehead bowed so low it nearly touched the stone, the posture of a condemned soul awaiting execution. Tears burst free, as if a dam had broken, splashing onto the floor in dark, uneven stains. Her entire body shook uncontrollably, as though she were standing in a blizzard without a coat. Roman felt the vibration of her pleading through the floor. Each word traveled through the stone, through the table legs, into the palm of his hand still resting on the mahogany. "Please, sir. Please spare us." She got out. "I had no one watching her. I'll take her away right now. Please don't kill us. Please, please." Camille didn't know Roman could feel her words through vibration. She only knew how to beg, the same way she had begged Derek 6 years ago, the same way she had begged on the night she lost her first child. The memory crashed over her like a flood. That night, she had knelt just like this, on the kitchen floor of a rotting Bronx apartment. She had been 7 months pregnant then, her belly stretched tight beneath a thin nightgown. Derek had stood over her, face flushed with alcohol, eyes burning with the senseless rage he always found a way to justify. She had begged, "Please, I'm begging you, don't hit me. Our child. Please think of our child." Derek hadn't thought of the child. Derek had kicked her stomach. Once, twice, 3 times, until blood ran down her legs, until pain tore her body apart, until she lay curled in her own blood and felt the child inside her stop moving. Her son. She had named him Daniel. She had dreamed of his birth, his first cry, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger. Daniel never got the chance to cry. Daniel was born in silence, a small purple body, not breathing, not moving, no heartbeat. She had held his body all night, until Derek dragged her up by the ear and told her it was her fault. It was always her fault. Now Camille knelt on the floor of another devil, begging for her remaining child, her only child, the child she had sworn to protect with her life. Rosie couldn't die. Rosie couldn't die. She would do anything, anything. Suddenly, the double doors slammed open with a thunderous bang. Luca Moretti stormed into the room, gun already drawn, eyes sweeping the space like a wolf scenting prey. Behind him, 2 bodyguards built like boulders, necks as thick as a man's thigh, had also drawn their weapons and were aiming straight at Camille. They had seen everything on the security cameras, the maid dropping the tray, a strange child appearing out of nowhere, chaos inside the Master's Cathedral of Ice. In this world, it was the highest level of security breach, and the punishment for a security breach was singular. Luca saw Camille kneeling on the floor, saw the child sitting on the rug, his face hardened like marble, devoid of emotion. His hands began signaling to Roman, fast and sharp like knife strikes. "Boss, she broke the rules. This is a level 1 security violation. The child could be carrying a listening device, could be bait for an assassin, could be biological poison. We can't take the risk. I'll handle it. I'll eliminate both of them. Clean, no trace." Luca raised his gun, aiming directly at Camille's head. His finger rested on the trigger, ready to pull. Camille closed her eyes. She wrapped her arms tightly around Rosie, pulling her close, using her own body as a shield. If she had to die, she would die first. The bullet would pass through her before it ever reached her daughter. At least she would give Rosie 1 more second. 1 second alive, 1 second breathing, 1 second existing in this world. Then a voice cut through the air. Rough, low like rolling thunder, heavy as mountain stone. A single word. No. Luca froze. The bodyguards froze. The entire room seemed to stop in time. Roman Ashford had spoken. And when the deaf Dawn spoke, the entire underworld listened. Luca couldn't believe what he had just heard. In 15 years of serving Roman Ashford, he had never once seen his boss violate his own rules. The rules were absolute. The rules were untouchable. The rules were what had kept this empire standing for more than a decade. And now, because of a strange child, Roman was breaking all of them. But Luca didn't dare question it. No one ever questioned the deaf Dawn. He slowly lowered his gun, signaling the 2 bodyguards to do the same. The 3 men stood motionless like statues, waiting for the next command. Roman signed with his hand, the movement sharp and final. Put the guns away. Luca obeyed, sliding his weapon back into its holster. But his eyes never left the child sitting on the floor, as if she were a ticking bomb that could detonate at any moment. Camille remained kneeling on the floor, clutching Rosie tightly, unable to believe what had just happened. She waited for the bullet to tear through her head. She waited for a cold and swift death, but it didn't come. Instead, there was only silence. Rosie, unaware that her life had just been spared, began to squirm in her mother's arms. She didn't like being held so tightly. She wanted freedom. She wanted to explore. Tiny hands pushed against Camille's chest. Chubby legs kicked, her mouth letting out irritated little sounds. Then she wriggled free of her mother's grip, faster than Camille could react. Camille lunged to grab her, but her hands froze midair when she realized where Rosie was crawling. Toward Roman Ashford. The entire room held its breath. Luca took a step forward, instinct screaming to stop the child, but Roman's gaze locked him in place. Don't touch her. That look said, let her be. Rosie crawled across the Persian rug stained with lobster soup, her small knees leaving damp marks on the priceless wool. She crawled beneath the massive mahogany table, weaving like a kitten discovering new territory, and she stopped right beside Roman's chair, big brown eyes lifted, meeting storm-gray eyes looking down at her. No fear, no hesitation, only the endless curiosity of a child not yet 1 year old who hadn't learned that the world was filled with terrifying men. Rosie raised her tiny hands and grabbed hold of the expensive wool of Roman's trousers. Small fingers clenched the fabric, tugging as she tried to pull herself upright. Roman didn't move. He looked down at the child clinging to his leg, using him as a ladder. It was the first time in 12 years that someone had touched him without trembling. Rosie hauled herself up, chubby legs shaking as she struggled to balance. She wobbled, nearly fell, then found her center. She stood there, not even 70 centimeters tall, as small as a doll before the enormous man seated above her. Then Rosie did something no one expected. She lifted her right hand, tiny fingers sticky with drool and biscuit crumbs from her afternoon snack, and slapped Roman's knee. Thump. A solid sound. A physical connection. Roman felt the vibration travel through bone, through flesh, through the fabric of his trousers, spreading up his thigh like a faint electric current. This wasn't the punch of an enemy. It wasn't the touch of a traitor. It wasn't the hand of the women he paid to satisfy desire and dismissed before dawn. This was the hand of a child, pure, innocent, asking for nothing, afraid of nothing. Rosie beamed, a gummy smile showing 2 newly emerged lower front teeth. She babbled something, meaningless to everyone in the room, yet its vibration traveled through Roman's shin bones like music. Then she lifted both arms toward him, the universal gesture of every child in the world when they want to be held. Up, her small lips seemed to say. Pick me up. Roman looked at the child. He looked into clear brown eyes that held no fear. He looked at plump cheeks pale from a failing heart. He looked at the tiny hands waiting for him. 12 years. 12 years he hadn't touched anyone without the intent to cause pain or exchange money. 12 years he had lived inside a cocoon of chosen isolation. 12 years he had told himself that intimacy was weakness, that affection was a weapon enemies could use to destroy him. Slowly, carefully, as if moving through water, Roman extended his hands. Large, scarred hands that had crushed throats, that had snapped bones like dry twigs. He placed them around Rosie's small body. She was warm, unbelievably light, soft like a cloud. He lifted her. Camille gasped, eyes wide with horror. She waited for him to throw the child aside. She waited for him to smash her head against the wall. She waited for the brutality everyone whispered about when they spoke of Roman Ashford. But Roman didn't do that. He gently settled Rosie onto his lap. And for the first time in 12 years, the deaf Dawn touched another human being, with no intention of causing pain. Rosie sat on Roman's lap as if that was where she belonged. No fear, no restlessness. Completely at ease in the arms of the most notorious killer in New York. Her tiny hand immediately grabbed the lapel of his suit jacket, wrinkling the expensive Italian silk without a hint of hesitation. She played with it, tugging and twisting, as if the $10,000 suit were nothing more than an amusing toy. Roman didn't stop her. He only watched. Storm-gray eyes followed every movement of the child on his lap, as if he were observing a creature from another planet. Then Rosie grew bored of the lapel. Her wide brown eyes began to explore the face of the man holding her. She stared at the jagged scar running from Roman's temple down his neck. The scar had been with him for 12 years, a permanent reminder of the night flames consumed the car carrying his parents, the night the explosion tore apart his eardrums and cast him into a world of eternal silence. Most people avoided looking at that scar. They were afraid. They were repulsed. They pretended it didn't exist because they knew that acknowledging the scar meant touching Roman's pain, and touching Roman's pain was an invitation to death. Rosie didn't know that. She lifted her tiny hand, chubby fingers touching the rough, scarred skin on Roman's neck. She explored it, feeling the texture of ruined flesh, her fingertips moving along the scar as if reading a story in Braille. Roman went rigid. His muscles tightened, his jaw clenched. For 12 years, no one had touched his scar. No one had dared. But he didn't push her hand away. He couldn't. Then Rosie did something that cracked the ice around Roman's heart. She moved her hand down and placed her entire tiny palm against his throat, right over his larynx, right where breath and heartbeat converged. She didn't squeeze. She didn't clutch. She simply rested her hand there, feeling the vibrations. The vibration of each breath Roman drew in and released. The vibration of blood flowing through his carotid artery. The vibration of life existing beneath cold skin. Rosie felt it. She felt that he was alive, breathing, existing. And she smiled, the brightest smile Roman had ever seen, as if she had just discovered the greatest secret in the universe. Roman understood. In that moment, he understood. She was communicating with him, not with words he couldn't hear, not with sign language she didn't know, but with vibration, with touch, with the only language they both understood. Roman's heart pounded in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Not the adrenaline of battle, not the fury of betrayal. This was something else. Something he thought had died along with his hearing 12 years ago. Roman lifted his gaze, looking at the people standing in the room. Luca, with his stone face and eyes full of confusion. The two massive bodyguards standing like statues, unsure how to react. Camille still kneeling on the floor, tears streaming, lips trembling without sound. "Get out," Roman said, his voice rough from disuse, low like distant thunder. He couldn't hear his own volume, so it came out like a growl from hell. Luca blinked. "Boss, the security risk. Out, now." 2 words. Final. No room for argument. Luca swallowed, nodded, and signaled the guards. The 3 men backed out of the room, closing the double doors behind them. The dining room was left with only 3 people. Roman on the chair with Rosie on his lap. Camille kneeling on the floor. Roman looked down at the trembling woman. He studied the brown eyes, swollen red from crying. Studied the pale skin drained by sleeplessness. Studied the burn scar barely visible on her nape where her hair had come loose during the struggle. "Stand up," he said, each word vibrating in his chest. Camille staggered to her feet, legs still shaking, head bowed, unable to meet his gaze. She waited for judgment, for punishment, for the worst. Roman looked down at Rosie. The child was reaching for the silver spoon on the table, drool pooling at her mouth, clearly hungry. He looked back at Camille. "Can she eat lobster yet?" The question fell into the silence of the room. Camille lifted her head, eyes wide, unable to believe what she had just heard. I'm sorry, what?" Roman pointed at the small creature sitting on his lap, trying to shove her fingers into the mouth of the silver spoon. "The child. Can she eat lobster yet?" Camille didn't understand the question. She stood there, legs still shaking, mouth opening and closing like a fish stranded on land. She had just braced herself for death, braced herself to watch her daughter be shot in front of her, and now the most terrifying man in the city was asking about the baby's diet. Rosie is only 11 months old," she stammered, her voice hoarse from crying too much. "She can only eat pureed food. She doesn't have enough teeth to chew yet." Roman didn't respond. He pressed a button on the table, a small, nearly invisible switch hidden beneath the edge of the wood. A few seconds later, the door cracked open, and Luca's wary face appeared. Roman signed, the movements quick and precise. Tell the kitchen to make pureed porridge for a baby. Right now. Bring another place setting. And a high chair. Luca stared at his boss as if Roman had just grown another head. In 15 years of service, he had never received an order this strange, but he didn't ask. He nodded and vanished behind the door. 10 minutes later, the icy dining room of Roman Ashford became the site of the strangest dinner in the history of New York's underworld empire. Roman sat at the head of the table, Rosie on his lap, trying to grab the silver spoon and gnaw on it. A high chair was brought in, but every time Camille tried to place Rosie into it, the baby shrieked and reached for Roman. In the end, Roman motioned for Camille to sit in the chair beside him, the chair no one had occupied in 12 years, and he kept Rosie on his lap while the child was fed pureed porridge. Camille sat next to her employer, holding the spoon, her heart pounding wildly. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why she was still alive. She didn't understand why her daughter was sitting on the lap of a killer, as if she were sitting on her grandfather's knee. Roman didn't eat. He only watched. Storm gray eyes followed every movement Camille made as she fed Rosie. He saw the way she cradled each spoonful, the way she wiped the baby's mouth with boundless gentleness, the way her brown eyes softened every time she looked at her daughter. Then he saw something else. When Camille reached for a napkin, the sleeve of her uniform slid up, exposing her wrist. The scars there. Many scars. Long, parallel lines, healed but still sharply etched into pale skin, not self-inflicted. These bore the shapes of tightened wire, of chafing chains, of nights tied to a bedpost for the crime of daring to look at another man on the street. Roman also saw the burn scar on her nape, now clearly visible as her hair had come loose, and he saw the way she flinched at every sudden sound, even the spoon touching the bowl. He saw how she always angled her body toward the doorway, the instinct of someone perpetually ready to flee. He saw how she placed her body between Rosie and everything else in the room, including him, as if she were prepared to die to protect her child at any moment. Roman took a tablet from the table drawer. He typed a few words and slid it toward Camille. Camille looked down at the screen, reading the line that appeared. "Who did those scars to you?" Her heart clenched. She looked up and met Roman's gaze. Cold, penetrating, no room for evasion. She looked back down at the tablet, trembling fingers touching the virtual keyboard. She typed a name, Derek Torres. Roman read. He typed again. "Tell me. Everything." And Camille told him. Through shaky lines on the tablet screen, she told him about 10 years of hell. She told him about her parents dying in a house fire when she was 15, about her aunt selling her to a trafficking ring to pay gambling debts. She told him about the dark basement, where she was locked up with 12 other girls, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. She told him about Derek, the man who bought her for $5,000 when she was 17, the man who told her it was love, that she should be grateful to be saved. She told him about the wedding night when she was beaten for the first time because she cooked the wrong dish. She told him about 10 years imprisoned in an apartment like a captive. No friends, no family, no one knowing she existed. She told him about her first pregnancy, about her son she named Daniel, about the night Derek kicked her stomach until blood ran down her legs and the 7-month-old child inside her stopped moving. She told him about holding her son's body all night before Derek threw it into the trash like a rotting bag of garbage. Her fingers stopped. Tears fell onto the tablet screen, blurring the words. She took a deep breath, then continued typing. She told him about her second pregnancy, about Rosie. She told him about the night she fled when she was 8 months pregnant, running with empty hands and a heart full of despair. She told him about the abandoned warehouse in Queens where she gave birth alone, biting her arm to keep from screaming, cutting the umbilical cord herself with a shard of broken glass. She told him about Rosie's first cry, weak and raspy, about the baby's unnaturally bluish skin from the moment she was born. She told him about the doctor's diagnosis at the charity clinic, ventricular septal defect, a hole in her daughter's heart. She told him about the surgery costing $200,000, about the 3-month deadline before Rosie's tiny heart wouldn't be able to endure anymore. She told him why she needed this job, needed every meager paycheck, needed anything at all to save her only remaining child. Camille set the tablet down, too exhausted to type another word. She didn't dare look up. She didn't want to see pity in anyone's eyes. She had known pity too well, always followed by abandonment. Roman read every line. His face remained expressionless, cold as ice. But beneath that ice, something was fracturing. He looked down at Rosie on his lap, the child with the failing heart, the child who shouldn't have existed yet smiled as if the world were full of beauty. He looked back at Camille, the mother who had crossed hell to bring her into the world, the mother willing to sell her soul to save her child. He picked up the tablet, typed a new line, and slid it back to her. That Derek, full name. Last address, you know. Everything you have. Camille read. Stunned, she typed back. Why? Roman didn't answer. He only looked at her with storm-gray eyes, cold and unreadable. But Camille, by the instinct of someone who had survived hell, understood. She didn't ask again. She picked up the tablet and began typing everything she knew about Derek Torres. 3 days later, an abandoned warehouse in an industrial section of Brooklyn lay submerged in darkness. It had once been a shipbuilding facility during World War II, now reduced to a rusting steel skeleton and the damp stench of neglect. There were no streetlights, no surveillance cameras, no witnesses, only the scurry of rats and the steady drip of water leaking from the broken roof onto cracked concrete. Derek Torres sat bound to an iron chair in the middle of the warehouse, wrists and ankles chained to the frame with barbed wire. His face was swollen, dried blood crusted along his split lips, his nose broken and twisted to one side. He had been taken while drunk in his usual bar in the Bronx, shoved into a car trunk, and driven here like a sack of trash. He didn't know why he was here. He didn't know who had taken him. He only knew fear. The metal warehouse door shrieked as it opened. Light spilled in from outside, carving the silhouette of a tall man stepping across the threshold. Roman Ashford entered the warehouse, his pace unhurried, the gait of someone in absolute control. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing scarred, muscular forearms. No suit, no tie. This wasn't dinner. This was work. Luca and 2 guards followed him inside, but Roman signaled them to stop at the door. He wanted to be alone. Luca nodded, pulled the men back, and closed the metal door. Darkness swallowed the space again, leaving only a single flickering bulb hanging above Derek's head, casting a sickly yellow glow like candlelight in a morgue. Roman stopped about 2 meters in front of Derek. He stood there in silence, storm-gray eyes studying the man who had carved scars into Camille's body. Derek looked up, eyes darting in terror. He didn't recognize Roman. He didn't know he was facing the deaf dawn. He only saw a man with a frightening scar and eyes colder than ice. "Who the hell are you?" Derek screamed, his voice shrill with panic. "Why am I here? What did I do? Do you know who I am? I've got connections. I've got protection. You'll die for this." Roman didn't hear a word, but he read Derek's lips, every syllable. Then Derek said more, his mouth twisting with rage and fear. "That bitch hired you, didn't she? That Camille whore. I'll find her. I'll kill her. I'll kill the thing she spawned. You hear me? She's my property." Roman read the word whore. He read, "Kill her." He read my property. Something in Roman's eyes shifted. Not an explosion of rage, not a loss of control, the opposite. Absolute cold, the calm of a man who had decided the person in front of him would no longer exist in this world. Roman removed his Patek Philippe watch and placed it carefully on a nearby wooden crate. He didn't want blood on it. He stepped forward and took a small knife from his back pocket. Not a cleaver, not a surgical blade, just a fruit knife, the kind found in any kitchen, small, sharp, and in Roman Ashford's hand, more lethal than any weapon. Derek saw the knife. He began to thrash, barbed wire cutting into flesh, blood streaming down his wrists. He screamed, begged, cursed, threatened. Roman heard nothing. He only watched Derek's lips move like a dying fish. 30 minutes later, Roman walked out of the warehouse. His black shirt was still spotless, not a single stain of blood. Clean work. That was his way. Derek Torres would never hurt anyone again, ever. The rest would be handled by Luca and the cleanup crew. No traces, no evidence. As if Derek Torres had never existed. Roman stopped at a rusted sink in the corner of the warehouse. He turned on the tap and let cold water run over hands that had done terrible things. He watched the blood dissolve into the stream, spiraling down the drain like sins being washed away. He took his phone from his pocket, opened a message, and typed a short line to Camille's number. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. The surgery for your daughter is arranged. The best doctors. I'll cover the cost." He pressed send and slipped the phone away. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't need thanks. He only needed to know that tonight, Camille and Rosie could sleep without fearing the ghost of the past would come for them. Luca waited outside, his face as expressionless as ever. He had served Roman long enough to know better than to ask what had happened inside. "It's done," Roman said, his voice low and tired. "Clean it up." Luca nodded and signaled the cleanup team. Roman walked toward the black car waiting nearby, his shadow stretching across the ground beneath the cold moonlight. Tonight, the New York underworld lost a third-tier thug. No one would miss Derek Torres. No one would look for him. But one mother and one child would sleep more peacefully from this night on. 2 weeks passed, and the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue no longer recognized itself. The changes began as small drops, then poured down like a flood. First came the high chair at the end of the dining table, a custom-made oak chair with gray velvet padding. Then there was the baby crib in the guest bedroom. Not the old travel crib Camille had brought, but a $10,000 crib with an orthopedic mattress and a silk mosquito net. Next came the toys. Soft stuffed bears, unfinished wooden stacking blocks, fabric books safe to chew without toxins. They lay scattered everywhere, on the $50,000 Persian rug, on the Italian leather sofa, even on Roman's desk. Luca watched these changes with undisguised confusion. He had seen his boss order executions without blinking, had seen Roman step over the bodies of enemies as if they were trash on the street. But he had never seen Roman sitting on the living room floor, letting an 11-month-old child crawl over him as if he were a mountain meant to be conquered. Rosie had turned Roman into something no one in the underworld could have imagined. They developed a private language, wordless, soundless, made only of vibration and touch. Rosie slapped the floor once, twice, 3 times. Roman tapped back, matching the rhythm. Rosie laughed and gave a more complex pattern. Roman mirrored it perfectly. That was their conversation. A silent symphony, only the two of them understood. Camille watched from a distance, her heart melting a little more each day. She saw Roman, the brutal killer feared by all of New York, carefully wiping drool from his suit lapel because Rosie was teething and couldn't stop salivating. She saw him learn to change diapers, clumsy at first, spilling powder all over the floor, but persistent until he mastered it. She saw him prepare milk at 2 a.m. because Rosie was crying for it, even though he couldn't hear her cries, only felt the vibrations through the floor and woke before she did. Then that night came. Rosie spiked a high fever, 104 degrees. Her tiny skin burned like embers, cheeks flushed, eyes dull, stripped of their usual curiosity. Camille panicked as she checked the temperature, hands shaking so badly she dropped the thermometer. She ran to Roman's room and pounded on the door, forgetting that he couldn't hear. But Roman already knew. He felt the frantic vibrations through the floor. Camille's heavy, hurried footsteps. He opened the door before she could knock a 3rd time. One look at her face and he understood. He didn't need an explanation. He rushed to Rosie's room. The baby lay curled in the crib, breathing raggedly. Her face was paler than usual, lips faintly blue as her weak heart struggled while her body fought the fever. Roman lifted Rosie, gentle but urgent. She burned in his arms, small and terrifyingly fragile. He felt her heart racing beneath her chest, fast and weak, like the wings of a bird about to break. He didn't say a word. He carried Rosie toward the door, Camille running behind him. Luca, alerted through the security system, already had the car waiting in the lobby. The black Maybach tore through Manhattan streets at 3 a.m, red lights ignored, traffic laws non-existent. Roman sat in the back seat, holding Rosie. One hand cradled her, the other rested over her chest, feeling every fragile heartbeat fighting to continue. Camille sat beside him, crying silently, fingers wrapped tightly around her daughter's tiny hand. Mount Sinai Private Hospital, pediatric emergency room. Roman carried Rosie inside, bypassing all registration procedures. One look from him and the receptionist immediately called the on-duty doctor. Rosie was rushed into emergency care. Doctors and nurses surrounded her like an army of white-clad angels. The heart monitor beeped, the line jumping like storm-tossed waves. Roman stood outside the glass doors, eyes never leaving her. He wasn't allowed inside. He could only stand there and watch, helpless, while the child who had changed his life fought for hers. 4 hours. 4 hours Roman stood like a statue before the emergency room glass. He didn't sit, didn't eat, didn't drink. He only stood and watched, storm-gray eyes unblinking, hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Camille sat on a nearby chair, head bowed, whispering prayers. Then the doctor stepped out. Roman read his lips. The fever is down. She's stable, but her heart is very weak. The surgery can't wait any longer. We need to operate this week. Roman nodded. Do it. Cost isn't an issue. The doctor nodded and returned inside. Roman stepped to the glass and placed his hand against the cold surface. Inside, Rosie lay on the hospital bed, tiny amid the wires and machines. Her eyes were closed, but the monitor showed a steady rhythm. She was sleeping. She would live. Roman felt something wet on his cheek. He lifted a hand and touched it, fingers meeting the warm liquid sliding down. Tears. For the first time in 12 years, since the night he lay on a stretcher and realized he would never hear again, Roman Ashford cried, not for his own pain, but for the fear of losing something more precious than his own life. Camille stood and stepped beside him. She said nothing. She simply placed her hand on his arm. A gentle, warm touch. Roman didn't pull away. For the first time in 12 years, he let someone touch him at his weakest moment, and he didn't feel it was weakness. He felt it was strength. 1 week after Rosie's successful surgery, just as everything seemed to be turning brighter, the darkness returned. Tommy Brennan, Roman's old advisor, the man who had served the Ashford family since the days when Roman's father was still alive, was found dead in his apartment on the Upper East Side. Luca was the one who discovered the body after Tommy failed to answer his phone for 2 days. Roman stood inside the apartment, storm-gray eyes sweeping across the scene. The air was thick with the metallic stench of dried blood. Tommy lay on the living room floor, his throat cut cleanly with a single precise slash, the work of a professional. The old man hadn't had a chance to fight back. 72 years old, bones worn, reflexes dulled. He had been an advisor, a strategic mind, not a warrior. But it wasn't Tommy's body that made Roman freeze. It was the writing on the wall, written in blood. Tommy's blood, scrawled, uneven, but unmistakably clear. "Do you miss me?" 5 words. 5 words that shook Roman's world to its foundations. Luca stood beside him, face drained of color. His hands moved, trembling. "Boss, this handwriting, this style, it looks like—" Roman nodded, cutting him off. He knew who it looked like. He knew all too well. Nathan, his brother, the one he had believed dead in the fire 10 years ago. Memories crashed over Roman like a tidal wave, dragging him back into a past he had tried to bury for a decade. 10 years earlier, Roman had been 26, newly in control of the empire after their parents' deaths. Nathan was 3 years older, the firstborn, the rightful heir by tradition. But their father had chosen Roman, not because Nathan was incapable, but because Nathan was greedy. Nathan didn't want to rule. Nathan wanted to own everything, at any cost. Roman had uncovered the truth on a stormy night. Nathan had secretly sold information to their enemies, the Castellano family in Chicago, in exchange for a promise of half the territory once New York fell. Nathan had betrayed his own blood. That night, Roman confronted his brother at Nathan's house on Long Island. Nathan had dropped to his knees, begging, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, brother. I had no choice. Father didn't choose me. He made me feel like I didn't exist. I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted something of my own." Roman had stood there, gun in hand, aimed at his brother's head. His finger rested on the trigger. 1 squeeze, 1 bullet, and it would all be over. But Roman didn't pull the trigger, not because he was weak, but because he remembered. He remembered Nathan teaching him to ride a bike when he was 5. He remembered Nathan shielding him when their father drank too much and lost his temper. He remembered Nathan holding him all night when their mother died of cancer, whispering that everything would be all right, that he would always be there to protect him. Roman couldn't kill his brother, so he gave Nathan a chance. He exiled him to Europe, gave him money, gave him a new identity, gave him a life thousands of miles away from New York. Then he burned the Long Island house to the ground, left behind an unidentifiable body from the city morgue, and told the world that Nathan Ashford had died in the fire. He had given Nathan a new life. He had spared the traitor. He had believed that would be enough. But Nathan didn't want a new life. Nathan wanted the throne. Nathan wanted revenge. Roman stood in Tommy's apartment, staring at the bloody message on the wall, and understood everything. Nathan had returned, not to reconcile, but to reclaim what he believed was his. Luca stepped closer to Roman, his face tight with tension. He signed. "Boss, if Nathan is alive, if he's in New York, this means he's been planning this for a long time. Killing Tommy was just a greeting. He wants you to know he's coming." Roman didn't respond. He looked at Tommy's body, the man who had taught him how to read lips after he lost his hearing, the man who had stood by him when no one else did. And he looked at the words in blood, a message from a ghost of the past he had tried to forget. "Do you miss me?" Yes, Roman remembered. He remembered the brother he had once loved, and he remembered the traitor he had spared. That mistake wouldn't be made a second time. The next day, Camille received a package. No one knew when it had been placed outside her room, as if it had appeared out of nothing. A small box wrapped in brown paper, no return address, only her name written in red ink, crooked like blood. Camille opened the box with trembling hands, and her scream echoed through the penthouse. Inside was a doll. A porcelain doll. the old-fashioned kind with blonde curls and blue glass eyes. It was beautiful. It was exquisite. And it had been beheaded. The doll's head lay separated inside the box, glass eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling as if begging for mercy. There was a note with it, the handwriting neat, as though the writer had all the time in the world. Your daughter is very beautiful. It would be such a shame if something were to happen to her. Roman appeared within seconds after hearing, "No," feeling the vibration of Camille's scream through the floor. He saw her shaking beside the box, her face white as paper. He saw the decapitated doll. He read the note, and his face turned to stone. No emotion on the surface. But Camille, who had learned to read him over the past weeks, saw his jaw clench until the vein at his temple stood out, saw his storm-gray eyes darken like a sky before a tempest, saw his hand tighten until the knuckles turned white. Roman took out the tablet and typed quickly. From now on, you and Rosie don't leave the penthouse. Guards 24/7. No one in, no one out without my permission. All food is checked before it comes in. All packages are burned. No exceptions. Camille read and nodded. But she asked, fingers shaking as they typed, "Who wants to hurt us? We haven't done anything to anyone." Roman looked at her for a long moment, gray eyes unreadable. Then he typed, "Not you. Me. Someone wants to destroy everything that belongs to me." Camille understood. Her chest sank, not with fear, but with realization. She typed back slowly, "Rosie and I. We belong to you." Roman didn't answer with words. He only looked at her, and in those storm-gray eyes, Camille saw the answer more clearly than any language could convey. In the days that followed, everything began to unravel. First came the shipment, 3 containers of weapons from Europe, worth $20 million, hijacked at the port of Newark. No traces, no witnesses. 12 security men executed cleanly, each with a single bullet to the head, the work of professional assassins. Then came the captain. Victor Marchetti, head of the Brooklyn sector, was found floating in the Hudson River with his throat cut and his little finger severed. Beside his body was a waterproof plastic note bearing the familiar words, "Do you miss me?" Then Marco De Luca, captain of the Queens sector, killed in a car bombing outside his home. His wife and 2 children watched their father turn into a living torch. Roman called an emergency meeting with all remaining senior lieutenants. 12 men sat around the conference table in the secret room beneath the penthouse. Roman sat at the head, silent as the dark, storm-gray eyes sweeping over every face. He said nothing. He only observed. Read lips as they whispered among themselves. Read body language as they shifted uneasily in their seats. Read their eyes when they thought he wasn't watching. There was a mole in this room. Roman knew it. Someone had leaked the shipping schedule. Someone had revealed the captain's locations. Someone was serving 2 masters. But who? The meeting ended without conclusions. The 12 men left, each carrying his own secrets. Roman remained alone in the darkness, hand resting on the table, feeling the vibration of silence. Luca entered and placed a phone in front of Roman. On the screen was a message from a hidden number, sent to Roman's private line, a number known by fewer than 5 people in the world. Ask Grace Chen, who recommended Camille for the job. Ask where the money came from. My dear little brother, you've always trusted too easily. Roman read the message, and his world shook once again. Grace Chen, the housekeeper who had worked for him for 5 years. The woman who had hired Camille. The woman he trusted almost completely. Nathan hadn't just returned. He had planted his pieces long ago. And Camille, the woman Roman had begun to open his heart to, might be one of those pieces. Roman didn't wait until morning. That very night, Grace Chen was taken to the interrogation room beneath the penthouse. It was a room with no windows, no cameras, nothing but 4 concrete walls and an iron chair welded to the floor. Grace sat in that chair, her hands cuffed to the armrests, her face pale as a corpse. She was 45 years old, had served as Roman's housekeeper for 5 years, and had been trusted almost completely. She knew Roman's schedule. She knew who came and went from the penthouse. She knew secrets that even Luca wasn't permitted to know, and she had sold all of it. Roman stood in front of Grace, silent as a statue. He didn't need to ask questions. He simply placed the phone displaying Nathan's message onto her lap and waited. Grace read the message. Her face collapsed. Her shoulders began to shake, and she cried. Not the tears of remorse, but the tears of someone who knew there was nowhere left to run. Luca stood nearby with the tablet in his hands, ready to record every word. Roman gestured. Tell everything. And Grace told everything. Line by line as Luca typed, the truth was laid bare, like a wound torn open. Nathan had approached her 6 months earlier, when he had secretly returned to New York. He knew her daughter was drowning in gambling debt, owing money to loan sharks who wouldn't hesitate to break arms or legs if payment was late. Nathan offered a deal, $200,000, enough to clear the debt and leave some extra, in exchange for one small favor: bring someone into the penthouse. A woman fleeing her husband, pitiful circumstances, a sick infant. The kind of person Nathan knew would strike the only weakness Roman possessed. Grace didn't know the larger plan. She only knew Nathan wanted a piece placed inside the penthouse. She didn't ask why. She needed the money, and she contacted Camille through a support program for abused women, offering her a job in Roman Ashford's home. Roman read the confession, word by word. Everything had been a trap. Camille wasn't a coincidence. Rosie wasn't an accident. It had all been arranged from the start. Nathan knew Roman lived in absolute isolation. He knew the only way to pierce the wall of ice around Roman was to send in something Roman couldn't resist. Innocence, purity, a child who didn't know fear, and a broken mother beautiful enough, pitiful enough, to awaken Roman's protective instinct. Nathan didn't just want to kill Roman. He wanted to destroy him, to strip away everything Roman cared about before delivering the final blow. But one question remained. Did Camille know? Was she an accomplice or merely an innocent piece Nathan had used? Roman left the interrogation room, leaving Luca to deal with Grace in the way traitors were always dealt with. He took the elevator back up to the penthouse level, his steps heavy as if he were carrying the weight of the world. The clock read 2 a.m. The hallway lay in darkness. Roman stopped outside Camille's door. He stood there for a long time, his hand resting on the handle, not turning it. Inside that room was the woman who had begun to melt his frozen heart, the child who had taught him how to feel again, the first family he had known since his parents died in flames. But what if she was the enemy? What if every smile, every touch, every warm moment had been an act? Roman turned the handle and stepped inside. Camille was sitting on the bed, rocking Rosie to sleep. Moonlight streamed through the glass, illuminating her face, making her pale skin glow like porcelain. She looked up when she saw Roman, brown eyes widening in the dark. She saw his face, cold as ice, none of the warmth she had grown used to over the past weeks. She saw him place the tablet on the table, the screen lighting up with Grace's confession. She read. Her face drained of color. She clutched Rosie tightly, as if afraid someone would tear the child from her arms. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear to you. Grace contacted me through the support program. I thought it was a chance, a blessing, the light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't know anyone was behind it. I didn't know there was a scheme. I just needed the job. I just needed the money to save Rosie." Roman looked at her. He had interrogated hundreds of people in his life. He knew when someone was lying. He knew every subtle sign of deceit. Camille's brown eyes weren't lying. There was only pure fear and desperation rising like a tide. But that didn't change the truth. She was Nathan's piece. Whether by accident or design, she had been used to reach him. And in Roman's world, there was no room for risk. She had to go. Roman typed on the tablet and slid it toward her. "I'll give you money, a new identity, a safe place to live, but you can't stay here anymore." Camille read, and tears began to fall. "Where would we go? I have no one. Rosie just had surgery. She needs monitoring. She needs doctors. She needs you." Rosie, as if sensing the tension, began to stir in her sleep. She shifted, brown eyes fluttering open, unfocused. She saw Roman standing in the darkness and reached both arms toward him, as she always did. "Buh." The sound slipped from her small lips, barely audible, but Roman read it. Baba, the first time Rosie had ever formed something close to a real word. And it was meant for him. Roman froze. He looked at the child. The child looked back at him, wide eyes full of trust. No suspicion that the man before her could abandon her at any moment. He stepped backward, turned, walked out of the room without looking back. The door closed behind him, leaving Camille with her tears, and Rosie with tiny hands still reaching into empty space. Roman didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with the lights off, the only illumination coming from the glow of Manhattan outside the glass walls. He remained motionless for hours, one hand resting on the desk, feeling the subtle vibrations of the penthouse sinking into sleep. But his mind refused to settle. That Baba kept echoing inside him, even though he hadn't heard it with his ears. He saw Rosie's tiny lips forming the sound, saw her small hands reaching for him, saw the absolute trust in her wide brown eyes, and he had turned his back and walked away. The next morning, Roman ordered Luca to prepare everything. A safe apartment in Boston, new identities for Camille and Rosie. Enough cash to live comfortably for many years. falsified medical records so Rosie could continue post-surgery care without anyone tracing her. He arranged it all perfectly, the way he always did. But he didn't go to see Camille. He couldn't. He was afraid that if he looked into her tear-filled brown eyes one more time, if he saw Rosie reach for him one more time, he wouldn't be able to let them go. And he had to let them go, for their safety. Because Nathan was targeting anything Roman cared about. Because he couldn't bear it if something happened to them because of him. That afternoon, Luca reported that everything was ready. The car would pick Camille and Rosie up at 10 in the evening, take them to the private airfield, and fly them to Boston before dawn. Roman nodded and said nothing more. He spent the entire afternoon in his study, pretending to handle business while in truth he was counting every minute until they left. He didn't go to say goodbye. He didn't go to see them one last time. He just sat there in the dark and waited for the vibration of the elevator doors closing, a sensation he couldn't hear but could always feel through the building. But that vibration never came. Instead, at 9:45 in the evening, 15 minutes before the scheduled departure, Roman felt something else. Strong vibrations. Wrong. Coming from the roof. He shot to his feet, reaching for his gun. The lights in the penthouse suddenly died. The security system went dark. Camera feeds turned black. Someone had disabled everything from inside. A mole. Not just Grace. There was someone else. Roman surged out of the study, moving through the darkness like a ghost. He didn't need light. He knew every inch of the penthouse the way he knew the lines of his own palm. Gunfire erupted, but he didn't hear it. He felt it through the walls, through the floor, through the air. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots. Suppressed, but still strong enough for him to sense. He ran down the corridor and stumbled over a body. One of his guards, shot in the head, eyes wide open in the dark. Then another body, then another. They had been taken down before they could react. This was the work of a professional hit team. Not street thugs, not business rivals. This was Nathan. Roman reached Camille's room and kicked the door open. His heart skipped. The room was empty. The bed was in disarray. Signs of a struggle everywhere. Rosie's nightlamp shattered on the floor. And blood. In those terrifying seconds of darkness before they were taken, Camille's survival instinct had kicked in. Remembering the quiet nights of training Roman had given her, she had lunged for the hidden handgun beneath the armchair cushion, frantically tucking the cold metal into the waistband of her skirt and shielding its silhouette with Rosie's thick baby blanket, just as Nathan's men breached the room. Not much, but blood on the sheets. Roman dropped to his knees and touched it, still wet, still warm. They had just been taken. He looked up and saw the message on the mirror. Written in red lipstick, the kind Camille used, the kind Roman had bought her on their only outing a week earlier. The old lighthouse. Before dawn. Alone. Or they both die. Roman read every word, and something inside him broke. Nathan had come. Nathan had taken them. Nathan had stolen the only thing that still made Roman want to live. Luca appeared behind him. Blood running down his forehead from a wound. He was alive. One of the few. Boss. They came in through the roof. Helicopter. Someone on the security team opened the access for them. I couldn't stop it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Roman didn't absorb the apology. He only stared at the lipstick words on the mirror. The old lighthouse. He knew the place. An abandoned lighthouse from the Victorian era, on a small island off the New York coast, where he and Nathan had played as boys, where they had sworn to be brothers forever. Nathan had chosen it to end everything. Alone. The message was clear. Nathan wanted Roman to come alone. This was a trap. Roman knew it, but he had no choice. In the empty room, still faintly scented with baby milk and Camille's soft perfume, Roman closed his eyes. He remembered the soundless baba from Rosie's lips. He remembered the pain in Camille's eyes when he turned away. He had tried to push them away to protect them, and that very act had delivered them into Nathan's hands. A mistake. An unforgivable mistake. Roman opened his eyes, and in those storm-gray eyes there was no longer cold calculation. There was only resolve, only fire. He would go to the lighthouse. He would bring them back, or he would die trying. Roman returned to the weapons room in the basement of the penthouse, a place even Luca was rarely allowed to enter. The room was small, windowless, with reinforced walls, holding the tools of destruction Roman had accumulated over more than a decade ruling the underworld. He turned on the light, cold white brightness washing over neatly aligned gun racks, carefully categorized ammunition boxes, and knives of every size and purpose. Roman took off his shirt, revealing a body mapped with scars. Each scar was a story. Each scar was a moment when he should have died but didn't. He He took a bulletproof vest from the locker, the best money could buy, light yet capable of stopping rifle fire. He put it on, tightened the straps, feeling the familiar weight settle against his chest. Then came the weapons. His trusted Beretta slid into the holster beneath his left arm. A backup Glock went into the holster at his right ankle. 2 knives, one at his belt, one inside his boot. A smoke grenade slipped into his jacket pocket. Roman checked each weapon, loading, unloading, loading again. The motions were mechanical, precise, repeated thousands of times until they lived in muscle memory. He didn't think about death. He thought about Rosie, about those wide brown eyes looking at him without a trace of fear, about the tiny hand resting on his throat to feel his breathing, about that first Baba, and perhaps the last. He thought about Camille, about the woman who had walked through hell to give birth to her daughter, about her tear-filled brown eyes when he turned his back the night before, about the way she always placed her body between Rosie and danger, even him. Roman pulled on a black coat over the vest, concealing the weapons. He looked into the mirror and saw his own face staring back, the scar running from his temple down his neck, storm-gray eyes cold as steel, the face of a man who had killed hundreds without blinking. But tonight, that killer was going to save his family. He left the weapons room and stepped back onto the penthouse level. Luca was waiting in the hallway, the wound on his forehead roughly bandaged, his face tight with worry. Roman knew Luca wanted to come with him, but the message had been clear. Alone, Nathan would kill Camille and Rosie immediately if he saw anyone else besides Roman. "Boss, this is a trap," Luca signed, his hands trembling with anger and helplessness. "Nathan wants you dead. He won't play fair. Let me come. Let me wait outside. Anything." Roman shook his head. He took a thick envelope from his inner pocket, sealed with wax bearing the Ashford family crest, and placed it in Luca's hands. "If I don't come back," he said, slow and deliberate so Luca could read his lips clearly, "everything in here is theirs. Give it to her. And to the child. The empire, the money, the properties, all of it. She'll know how to use it. And if she doesn't come back either, burn it all. Don't let Nathan touch anything that belongs to me." Luca looked at the envelope, then up at Roman. The eyes of the 40-year-old man, a killer without hesitation, loyal to Roman for 15 years, began to redden. He said nothing. He only nodded, gripping the envelope as if it were a final promise to the man he considered a brother. Roman placed a hand on Luca's shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. No farewell. No thanks. Just the grip of 2 men who had walked through hell together and understood each other without words. Then Roman turned and walked toward the elevator. His steps were steady, without hesitation. He pressed the button and the doors slid open. He stepped inside and turned back to look at Luca one last time. Luca stood there, envelope in hand, eyes wet but not shedding tears. He raised his hand in a military salute, a gesture of respect he had never made before. Roman nodded in return. The elevator doors closed, swallowing him into the darkness. The deaf dawn was heading into the night, a night from which he might never see morning again. But he wasn't afraid. For the first time in his life, Roman Ashford had something worth dying for. 4 a.m. The sky was still black as ink, with only a faint moon filtering through thick storm clouds rolling in from the ocean. Roman's speedboat docked against the rotting pier of the deserted island, where the old Victorian-era lighthouse rose like a ghost from the past. The island was small, barely 2 acres wide, about 15 nautical miles off the coast of New York. No residents, no electricity, no life beyond seabirds and memories. Roman stepped onto the pier, the decayed wood groaning beneath his boots. The sea wind sliced through him, sharp with salt and the stench of rotting kelp. He couldn't hear the waves crashing against the rocks or the wind howling through the broken seams of the lighthouse, but he felt every vibration. The sea was angry tonight, as if nature itself knew blood was about to be spilled. The lighthouse loomed before him, roughly 30 meters tall, built from gray granite eaten away by time and salt. The windows were shattered. The rusted iron door hung ajar like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow its prey. Roman drew his gun and stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him whole. He moved slowly, back pressed to the cold stone wall, climbing the spiral staircase one careful step at a time. The iron stairs were badly corroded, groaning and cracking under his weight. Every step was a gamble. Any rung could give way at any moment. But Roman didn't stop. He climbed, turn after turn, counting each step like counting the heartbeats he had left. 50 steps, 70 steps, 90 steps. At last, he reached the top, the lantern room, where a massive light once rotated through the night to guide ships home, now held only a rusted frame and broken glass. Wind tore through the empty window frames, ripping at Roman's hair and coat. And there, seated atop the old beacon mechanism like a king on his throne, was Nathan Ashford. Roman's brother wore a pristine white suit, defiant against the brutal weather. The left side of his face was a mass of horrific burn scars, skin twisted and ruined, a souvenir from the fire Roman had set 10 years earlier. But the other half remained handsome, disturbingly similar to Roman's own face. They were brothers, same father, same mother, same blood. Nathan smiled when he saw Roman, the scar pulling his mouth into a crooked grin. In his left hand was a small detonator, his finger resting on the button. In his right hand was a microphone, connected to something that instantly caught Roman's attention. Speakers. Dozens of massive speakers surrounded the room, wired together with tangled cables running to car batteries. This wasn't sound equipment. It was a weapon. Roman understood immediately. Nathan knew his only weakness. Roman couldn't hear, but he felt vibration, and sound waves at the right frequency and intensity could turn vibration into a lethal assault. They could disrupt the fluid in Roman's inner ear, the last system keeping his balance intact. They could make him dizzy, nauseous, disoriented, helpless. Then Roman saw them. In the corner of the room, bound to 2 chairs side by side, Camille, her mouth sealed with black tape, eyes swollen and red from crying, yet still forcing herself to stay calm. And Rosie, in her mother's arms, tied together with thick rope binding them as one. The child wasn't crying. She was simply looking at Roman with those wide brown eyes. And in them there was no fear, only absolute trust that the man who had just entered would save her. Roman felt his chest tighten. They were alive. They were still okay. He wasn't too late. Nathan stood, lifting the microphone to his mouth, his voice booming through the speakers. Roman couldn't hear it, but he read his brother's lips clearly in the dim light of the coming dawn. "Hello, little brother. At last, the family is together again." Nathan stepped down from the old beacon mechanism, his polished leather shoes striking the rusted metal floor with slow, confident steps. He circled Roman like a predator savoring its prey, the burned half of his face twisted in a triumphant smile. Roman stood motionless, the gun still in his hand but not raised, storm-gray eyes never leaving Camille and Rosie in the corner of the room. He was calculating distance, angles, the chance of saving them before Nathan could react. But Nathan knew exactly what he was thinking. He always had. They were brothers, raised together, trained by the same father. Nathan lifted the detonator, his finger brushing the button. "Do you see the wire wrapped around the legs of her chair?" He spoke into the microphone, his words booming through the speakers so Roman could read his lips in the flickering light. "C4. Enough to turn both of them into fragments. You shoot me. I press this. All 3 of us die. That's simple." Roman lowered his gun slowly so Nathan could see. He had no choice. Not yet. Nathan laughed loudly, the sound pouring from the speakers like the laughter of a demon from hell. He stepped closer to Roman until only a few feet separated them. "Do you want to know why I did all of this?" Nathan asked, both eyes, the unscarred one and the ruined one, burning with hatred. "Why I didn't just kill you and take back the Empire. Why I killed Tommy, killed your captains, sent Camille to you, played all these little games." Roman didn't answer. He only watched Nathan, waiting. "Because I wanted you to understand," Nathan roared, the scarred side of his face twitching with emotion. "I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything, one thing at a time, slowly, painfully, the way you did to me 10 years ago. You didn't kill me. That's true. You let me live, but you took everything from me. My identity, my family, my empire, my power. You exiled me to Europe like a stray dog. You burned my house. You burned my face." Nathan tore open the collar of his white suit, revealing burn scars running down his chest and shoulder. "Look at it. Look at what your beloved little brother did to his own brother. I lived 10 years in hell, 10 years looking in the mirror and seeing a monster, 10 years planning this night." Roman read every word on Nathan's lips, and something stabbed deep into his chest. Not fear, regret. He had let Nathan live because he couldn't kill his own brother. He had called it mercy, but maybe it had only been cowardice. And now that cowardice was threatening the lives of the 2 people he loved most. "I chose her very carefully, you know." Nathan turned his gaze to Camille, hunger and cruelty gleaming in his eyes. "A broken woman, a child with a failing heart, tragic enough to soften your frozen heart. I knew you wouldn't resist." The deaf Don, who never let anyone close, would open his door to a child who didn't know fear and a desperate mother. And I was right. Camille struggled against the ropes, trying to scream through the tape, only muffled sounds escaping as tears streamed down her face. She didn't know. Roman understood. She truly hadn't known she was Nathan's pawn. She was a victim too, just like him. Now for the fun part. Nathan turned back to the control console where the speakers were wired into the amplifier. Do you know what's interesting about sound waves, little brother? You can't hear them, but you can feel them. Vibration is the only thing still connecting you to the world, and I'm going to use it to destroy you. Nathan placed his hand on the frequency dial. Sound is air pressure. At a high enough frequency and intensity, it can disrupt the fluid in your inner ear, the only part still working to keep you balanced. You won't be able to stand, won't be able to aim, won't be able to fight. You'll kneel at my feet like you should have 10 years ago. He twisted the dial. High-frequency sound blasted from the massive speakers surrounding the room. Roman heard nothing. His world was as silent as it had always been, but he felt it. A violent vibration slammed into his body like an invisible wall. It tore through skin and bone and skull, striking straight into his inner ear. The world began to spin. Roman staggered, fighting to stay upright, but his legs felt hollow, boneless. Nausea surged up his throat. His vision blurred, everything smearing into spinning streaks of color. He dropped to one knee, one hand braced on the floor, struggling not to collapse completely. The gun slipped from his grasp and skidded across the metal floor. Nathan laughed madly and cranked the dial higher. The vibration intensified, sharper, more painful, as if thousands of needles were piercing Roman's skull at once. He collapsed face down on the floor, clutching his head, helpless under the invisible torture. Look at you. Nathan stepped forward, standing over Roman, pleasure gleaming in his eyes. A king on his knees, the deaf dawn crawling like a worm. He drew a gold-plated Desert Eagle from his belt and raised it, aiming straight at Roman's head. Speaking of children, I'd really enjoy raising that little girl. Nathan laughed, his voice thundering through the speakers like hellfire. She needs a father who can hear her cry. Roman looked up, vision still swimming, but he saw the barrel pointed at his forehead. He saw Nathan's finger resting on the trigger, ready to pull. He couldn't stand. He couldn't fight. He couldn't do anything except wait to die. Was this how the Deaf Dawn ended? Killed by his own brother, in the lighthouse where they had once sworn they would always be brothers. A gunshot tore through the night, but it didn't come from Nathan's Desert Eagle. Nathan's right shoulder exploded in a spray of bright red blood, white vest fabric shredding apart as bone and flesh burst outward like a grotesque firework. Nathan screamed, a roar of pain and disbelief, dropping the gold-plated gun as it clattered against the metal floor. He spun toward the source of the shot, eyes wide with shock. Roman, still reeling from the vertigo, turned his head in the same direction. Camille stood in the corner of the room, both hands locked around a small handgun, her stance steady even as her entire body trembled. The ropes lay loose at her feet. The black tape had been torn from her mouth. Rosie was still strapped against her chest, tiny and silent, as if she understood this was not the moment to cry. The gun in Camille's hands was the one Roman had secretly hidden beneath the cushion of her chair in the penthouse weeks earlier, the one he had taught her to use during quiet evenings after Rosie had fallen asleep. He had taught her how to load it, how to aim, how to pull the trigger. He had told her that in his world, women needed to know how to protect themselves. He never imagined she would use it to save him. Camille had freed herself while Nathan was consumed with torturing Roman. She had used his arrogance, his certainty that a broken woman could do nothing but cry and beg. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten she was a woman who had survived 6 years of hell, who had given birth alone in an abandoned warehouse, who had escaped a demon with nothing but her bare hands. "Rosie already has a father," Camille screamed, her voice shaking but her gun unwavering. "Don't you ever touch my daughter." Nathan howled in madness and pain, his left hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, yet his legs still charged toward Camille like a wounded beast. He wanted to kill her, to tear her apart with his bare hands. But the moment he moved away from the control console, the sonic pressure dropped. Roman felt the change instantly. The dizziness remained, but it no longer paralyzed him. He forced himself upright. He didn't need balance. He didn't need clear vision. He only needed the rage flooding his veins. He lunged forward, slamming into Nathan from behind just before Nathan could reach Camille. The two brothers crashed together with brutal force, smashing through the rusted railing of the lantern room, decayed metal snapping like dry twigs. They tumbled outside, landing on the narrow maintenance walkway circling the lighthouse, a strip of metal barely 3 feet wide. The platform shuddered and groaned under the weight of 2 men. The wind at this height was savage, shredding clothing and lashing skin like whips. 100 feet below, the Black Sea roared, waves smashing against the rocks in bursts of white foam. Nathan was faster, driven by cocaine and 10 years of cultivated madness. He punched Roman in the jaw, a blow that snapped his head sideways and sent him stumbling into the railing. Rusted metal bit into Roman's back in sharp agony. Nathan leapt forward, both hands clamping around Roman's throat, thumbs crushing into his windpipe with murderous strength. "Die!" Nathan screamed, his face twisted in hatred, the burned half contorting like a demon's mask. "Die and let me take what's mine." Roman couldn't breathe. His lungs burned. Darkness crept inward from the edges of his vision. He felt life slipping away, second by second. His hand scraped across the wet metal floor, slick with sea mist and closed around something hard and heavy. A rusted iron bolt, torn loose from the failing railing. He gripped it, but didn't strike. Instead, he stopped fighting, completely still. His body went limp, as if he had accepted death. Nathan blinked, confused by the sudden absence of resistance. He loosened his grip for a fraction of a second, instinctively checking whether his prey was already dead. "Giving up already, little brother." Roman lifted his left hand. Not to strike, not to choke. He gently placed his palm against the burned side of Nathan's face, touching the twisted, scarred skin he himself had caused when he set the fire 10 years earlier. Nathan froze, his body locking as if struck by lightning, unable to understand what Roman was doing. "I loved you," Roman whispered. Each word carried as vibration through his hand, straight into Nathan's cheekbone so he could feel it. "I loved you more than anyone in the world. You were my brother. You protected me when father drank. You held me when mother died. I didn't want to kill you. I gave you a chance." Nathan's eyes filled with tears. For a brief moment, he was no longer the madman bent on destruction. He was the boy Nathan from long ago, the one who taught his little brother how to ride a bike, who shielded him from their father's rage. "But they need me." Roman's eyes hardened like steel locked in winter. "And I choose them." Roman swung the iron bolt with every shred of strength he had left. It smashed into Nathan's temple with a dry, cracking sound as the skull gave way. Nathan's eyes rolled back, pupils blown wide. His hand slipped from Roman's throat and fell limp at his sides like a puppet with its strings cut. His body tipped sideways, gravity pulling him through the gap in the shattered railing. Roman watched his brother fall. The white suit fluttered in the wind like the wings of a fallen angel. Nathan didn't scream. He didn't struggle. He just fell, swallowed by the darkness, devoured by the black sea below. No sound rose back up, only silence. The silence Roman had lived with for 12 years. Roman lay paralyzed on the metal walkway, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the cold rain washed Nathan's blood from his face. As the sky shifted from black to gray in the first light of dawn, a bone-deep weariness settled over him. He stared at the horizon, his soul heavy with a haunting question. Was he a savior for protecting his family, or merely a monster who had finally been forced to destroy his own blood? Then he felt a small vibration, then another, rhythmic, familiar. He turned his head, and his heart tightened. Rosie was crawling out onto the maintenance walkway, her tiny knees moving across the wet metal, straight toward him. Camille followed close behind, her face pale with fear, reaching to pull her back. But Rosie was stubborn as always. The child didn't care about the 100-foot drop beside her, didn't care about the screaming wind, didn't care about anything except the man lying motionless in front of her. Rosie crawled to Roman and stopped beside his face. Her wide brown eyes looked down at him, and in them there was no fear, no worry, only the pure and unconditional love of a child not yet a year old for the man she believed was her father. Rosie lifted her tiny hand and placed it on Roman's rain-soaked cheek. Pat, pat, gently, the same way she did every morning when she woke him, the same way she had always spoken to him through touch and vibration. Roman closed his eyes, and something inside him finally broke. Tears slid from the corners of his eyes, mixing with the rain, warm and salty. The first tears in 12 years, not from pain, not from loss, but from gratitude. Gratitude that he was alive, gratitude that they were alive, gratitude that for the first time in his life, he had something worth crying for. He lifted his large blood-stained hand and gently placed it over Rosie's tiny one, holding on, not letting go. Camille dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around both of them, as if afraid they would vanish if she let go. 3 people, on top of a ruined lighthouse, after the storm had passed, holding each other in the first light of a new dawn. The war was over. Silence had won. In the aftermath of the lighthouse confrontation, Roman made a final, decisive move to sever his ties with the underworld. He utilized his vast resources to systematically dismantle the illegal sectors of his empire, to turning state's evidence against his former rivals to clear his own path while restructuring his immense wealth into a transparent, legitimate corporate entity designed to provide a clean legacy for his new family. 6 months later, the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue had been fully restored. New bulletproof glass, 3 inches thick, a security system upgraded with the most advanced technology available. But the greatest change wasn't in architecture or equipment. It was at the dining table. Roman Ashford sat at the head of the mahogany table, but it was no longer set for one. To his right, Camille sat reading a law textbook, brown eyes focused on each page. She was no longer a maid. She was the executive director of the Ashford Foundation, overseeing all the legitimate businesses Roman was transitioning toward. The scars on her wrists had been erased with laser treatment, not because she wanted to forget the past, but because she was ready to write a new chapter. At the end of the table, in a high chair, Rosie held a spoon with the surprising coordination of a 17-month-old. Her skin was rosy and healthy, no longer pale as before. The heart surgery 6 months earlier had been a complete success. The hole in her tiny heart had been repaired, and Rosie could now run and play like any other child. Roman didn't eat. He just sat and watched them. Watched Camille turn each page with quiet concentration. Watched Rosie try to scoop her food and spill it everywhere. Watched a room that had once felt like a tomb, now filled with the warmth of life. Rosie looked up and caught Roman's gaze. She grinned, showing her new baby teeth, then banged her spoon on the tray. Thump, thump, 2 steady beats. She looked at Roman, waiting. Roman lifted his own spoon and tapped it on the table. Thump. Thump. Same rhythm. Rosie giggled and tapped again, more complex. Thump, thump, thump. Roman copied her perfectly. Thump, thump, thump. A conversation. A language of rhythm and vibration only the two of them understood. A language of love without words. Camille looked up from her book, watched them, and smiled. She reached out and placed her hand over Roman's resting on the table. He didn't pull away. He turned his hand, laced his fingers through hers, and squeezed gently. Roman looked out through the glass at Manhattan spread beneath the golden dusk. Outside, the world was still silent to him, still without sound. But inside this penthouse, within the embrace of his new family, silence was no longer lonely. For the first time in 12 years, the deaf Dawn didn't resent the silence. Because for the first time, he wasn't eating alone. And that is the story of Roman Ashford, the man who conquered the underworld in silence, only to be redeemed by the loudest sound of all, a child's first call for her father. This story reminds us that even the most frozen hearts can be softened by innocence, that even the tallest walls can fall before pure love, and that sometimes the most frightening person in the room is the only one who can save you. How did this story make you feel? Did it make you think about the relationships in your own life? About the walls you've built? About the people trying to reach your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear what's on your mind. If this story touched you, please like and share this video with those you love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories every day. Thank you sincerely for staying with us until the very last moment. We wish you and your family health, joy, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.